Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. In this episode, we will be covering the Srivijaya Empire and the Almohad Caliphate. So these are two particularly important or fascinating empires. The Srivijaya Empire, because it's our first seafaring empire that we've covered. We covered the sea people who have destroyed some empires previously that we've discussed, but this is the first one that actually makes the list. As well, the Almohad Caliphate, we've covered some other caliphates, but this one is sort of unique because it's the full-scale caliphate size, but it's also North Africa and Spain, so a little bit different from some of our other caliphates often based out of Iran, for example. As well, from each empire, we'll highlight a specific leader. So from the Srivijaya Empire, we'll highlight Maharaja Sri Jayanasa. And from the Almohad Caliphate, we'll highlight Ibn al-Mumin. So, and at the end, we will have a comparison between the two leaders. So I hope by covering these leaders, we learn a bit more about their respective empires. And then at the end, by comparing them, we learn more about the leaders and once again, their respective empires. So that will be the structure of this episode, and I apologize for the strange lighting. Perhaps it's actually a solar eclipse. So it's perhaps a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So this is April the 8th of 2024. So I thought perhaps might as well have alignment. I'm also based in the Atlantic at 4:45 p.m. approximately. So without further ado, we shall begin with the first empire. So the Srivijaya Empire was a maritime and commercial powerhouse that emerged in Southeast Asia, specifically on the island of Sumatra around the 7th century CE, that's Common Era. Its rise and fall represent a significant chapter in the history of the region. So the Srivijaya, also spelled Srivijaya, two separate words, was a Buddhist thalassocratic empire. That means seafaring empire based on the island of Sumatra. This is the first seafaring empire that we've covered so far, interestingly enough, in present-day Indonesia, a place I'd like to visit someday, that influenced much of Southeast Asia. Srivijaya was an important center for the expansion of Buddhism, so it's very unique also in that way too. It's Buddhist as well, from the 7th to 11th century AD or CE. So not all of our empires have had a religion necessarily, and even fewer of those were Buddhist as well. So it's quite unique. Srivijaya was the first polity to dominate much of Western maritime Southeast Asia, so the first to do so. Due to its location, Srivijaya developed a complex technology utilizing maritime resources. In addition, its economy became progressively reliant on the booming trade in the region, thus transforming it into a prestige goods-based economy. So very, very unique empire in many, many ways. So in all empires, we will start with the rise and the fall to see maybe why it might have succeeded, but also why it might fail, and why maybe today empires might fail, or countries. So the rise of the Srivijaya Empire. So its early foundations, so the exact origins of the Srivijaya are somewhat obscure, but it is likely it began as a trading settlement around Palembang region of Sumatra in the 7th century CE. Its strategic location along the Malacca Strait facilitated trade between China, India, and the various kingdoms of Southeast Asia. So we've covered actually quite a few Chinese dynasties and quite a few empires emerging out of Asia, but we haven't seen a lot of empires emerging out of Southeast Asia yet. So I hypothesize this Srivijaya Empire was sort of facilitated the growth of Southeast Asia, and it grew out of power through its connection with India and China as well. As for its expansion and dominance, Srivijaya's dominance grew steadily as it expanded its influence over nearby regions, including the Malay Peninsula, Java, and parts of Borneo, so Malaysia. This expansion was driven by its control over crucial trade routes, as well as its naval power in diplomatic prowess. So not only were they effective in trade, but they were also effective in diplomacy as well, but also naval power, so they knew how to lead with the sword and the stick and the carrot. As for trade and culture, Srivijaya's prosperity was deeply intertwined with maritime trade, as mentioned. It controlled key trade routes, particularly the maritime Silk Road. and acted as middleman between China, India, and the kingdoms of Southeast Asia, as previously mentioned. This facilitated the exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures, leading to a flourishing art, religion, particularly Buddhism, and architecture in the region. So also these trading empires that we've covered seem to also blend many different cultures, because they're receiving goods and moving goods. They inevitably touch those cultures as they move them. As for the political structure, Srivijaya's political structure was a loose confederation of city-states and territories, with a Palembang as its capital. It was ruled by a Maharaja, one of which we will highlight specifically, who exercised control over vassal states and maintained a powerful navy to protect its interests. Technically, the title of this government is a Mandala state, which we will cover in detail as we discuss the content of the slide. As for its zenith, the zenith of the Srivijaya, the Golden Age, Srivijaya reached its zenith during the 8th to the 12th century, so quite a long zenith, or at least there's no definitive peak that one can point out, so a long period, becoming one of the most influential empires in Southeast Asia. Its wealth and power were at their peak, with control over vast maritime trade networks of diplomatic ties with China, India, and the Abbasid Caliphate even. So even as far as the Abbasid Caliphate, which, as we mentioned, is tied for the 7th largest empire of all time, that we will be covering of all time, with the Umayyad Caliphate as well. So China, India, and the Umayyad Caliphate, to get a scale of how powerful this empire was, to interact with these some of these monolithic empires at times, and over a huge period of time as well. The zenith for some empires it would be 100 years. This is from the 8th century to the 12th century, 400 years. As for cultural influence, Srivijaya's influence extended beyond trade and politics. It played a crucial role in the spread of Buddhism as well throughout the region. Buddhist scholars and monks traveled to Srivijaya, contributing to its intellectual and cultural vibrancy. So perhaps the Buddhism was being spread as well as they facilitated trade, but also as they conquered and defeated other peoples as well, or at least exerted their naval dominance. As for the decline and fall, however, of Srivijaya, starting with external pressures, so usually there's internal and external factors. Here it seems the external factors come first, so perhaps they are the larger cause in this case, which seems to be, most cases, it seems to be that internal factors seem to preclude the external factors so far, on average. So as for external pressures, Srivijaya faced increasing external pressures from rival kingdoms, particularly the Chola Empire, which we've referenced on many maps and we will discuss in detail soon, in southern India. As well, conflict over control of trade routes and territorial disputes weakened Srivijaya's position, so we're not able to retain, so other empires infringed on the prosperity and the wealth of their trade routes. Furthermore, on the Chola invasions, so the Chola invasions in the 11th century dealt a severe blow to Srivijaya's power. The Chola navy, under the leadership of Rajendra Chola the First, launched several successful campaigns against Srivijaya, capturing key ports and disrupting its trade networks. These would be fascinating battle scenes to see. Not saying they're morally justified or anything of that sort. I'm not saying they're not, but nonetheless, it would be interesting to see the warfare on these naval battles at this period of time. Would be fascinating. Quite a unique empire, and this is not as covered, at least in Western education. As for internal strife, concurrently, internal strife and succession disputes further weakened Srivijaya's ability to resist external threats. The empire fractured into smaller polities, losing its centralized authority and cohesion. So perhaps these external Chola invasions and other kingdoms threatening on their trade routes allowed for these internal succession disputes to ultimately allow to decline. But it also must be noted that then it was never too centralized to begin with, which might have been one reason why maybe it lasted so long but ultimately did decline. So thus, the end of Srivijaya. By the 13th century, Srivijaya had lost much of its territory and influence. Its decline paved the way for the rise of other maritime powers in the region, such as the Majapahit Empire on Java. While remnants of Srivijaya continued to exist in the form of smaller kingdoms, its era of dominance had come to an end. But still quite a long period of time, 600 to 1300 CE. So thus the legacy of Srivijaya persists in South Asian history and culture, particularly in the realms of trade, Buddhism, and maritime navigation. Despite its eventual decline, Srivijaya's lasting impact on the region's development remains significant and very unique and fascinating. And some of these sites I'd like to visit. This is an area that Graham Hancock recently covered, a lot of things in Indonesia and Java particularly. Graham Hancock is a very fascinating individual. I'm interested in his work, and he recently went to Java and Indonesia, and I'd like to check out these places. I've been fortunate to visit many great historical sites, but none of these, and none in Indonesia or Micronesia or any of those, or Java, for example, or Malaysia, etc. Oceania, broadly. As for specific leaders, so we have Maharaja Sri Jayanasa. So the most important ruler, perhaps, of the Srivijaya Empire is often considered to be Maharaja Sri Jayanasa, also known as Dharmasetu Maharaja. He reigned during the zenith of Srivijaya's power and is credited with expanding the empire's influence, fostering trade, and promoting Buddhism throughout Southeast Asia. So Dapunta Hyang Sri Jayanasa, another name for him, was the first Maharaja, or the great king of Srivijaya. So Maharaja means great king of Srivijaya, and he was the first great king, and thought to be the dynastic founder as well of the Kadatuan Srivijaya, which is a dynasty. His name was mentioned in a series of Srivijayan inscriptions dated from the 7th century CE, dubbed the Siddhayatra inscriptions, describing his sacred journey to acquire blessings and also to conquer neighboring areas. So simultaneously a religious figure as well as political. He reigned around the turn of the 7th century to the 8th century, more precisely the period between 671 to 702 CE. So that, pardon me, they did mention as a zenith, so it was one peak, but it is also the start. So I would say it continued to improve after this period. But nonetheless, he was the founder, or at least the first king, or the first Maharaja, the founder of a dynasty, or the dynasty. As for his early life and ascension, so Maharaja Sri Jayanasa was born in the late 8th century during a period of relative stability, and or late 8th century, or even 7th century. So pardon me, there's a lot of dispute regarding these dates, but we'll put his reign at least at 671 to start the Srivijaya Empire. But he must have been born quite a bit before that, so we'll place it arbitrarily, and this is my judgment, to average out some dates. Perhaps he was born in 650 CE, and he came to power at 21. Seems to be a somewhat fitting date, but maybe even younger, or perhaps more likely older. His exact date of birth and early life details are not well documented, as mentioned, but he likely hailed from a noble family and his ties to the ruling elite of Srivijaya, so at least he came from likely the highest echelon, if not the highest family. He ascended to the throne of Srivijaya at a relatively young age, following the death of his predecessor. What a young age is hard to say, but nonetheless, he came to the throne naturally. His coronation marked the beginning, however, of a pivotal era of Srivijaya's history, characterized by expansion, cultural flourishing, and diplomatic outreach. So as for his expansion and consolidation, under Maharaja Sri Jayanasa's rule, Srivijaya reached unprecedented heights of power and influence, forming this officially as an empire. He initiated ambitious military campaigns to expand the empire's territorial control, particularly in the Malay Peninsula and parts of Java and Borneo. These conquests solidified Srivijaya's dominance over key trade routes and facilitated the flow of wealth and resources into the empire. So before his time, it was not an empire. There was still these city-states ruling these regions, trading in these regions, but it was through military might that he formed it officially as an empire at this time. Maharaja Sri Jayanasa's administration focused further on consolidating these newly acquired territories, implementing efficient governance systems, and fostering economic development. So as we've seen, a lot of the rise of empires have been through centralization, and a lot of their declines is through decentralization. So at least at the start, they did relatively centralize the trade routes and centralize their military authority to make it an empire, not just an informal network of city-states through his efforts. Furthermore, he established administrative centers and appointed local governors to oversee the administrative of distant provinces, ensuring stability and loyalty within the empire. So by creating local governors, that is creating a stronger bureaucracy, is a stronger centralized government. We've talked about this a lot in reference to Alexis de Tocqueville on the old regime of the French Revolution, how a monarch is sort of necessarily dependent on their local governors or their lords. As for his promotion of Buddhism, so one of Maharaja Srivijayanasa's most enduring legacies is his patronage and promotion of Buddhism, so a unique feature for him and the empire. He was a devout follower of the faith and actively supported the construction of Buddhist temples, monasteries, and educational institutions throughout Srivijaya and its vassal states. Under his patronage, Srivijaya became a center of Buddhist learning and scholarship, attracting scholars, monks, and practitioners from across Southeast Asia and beyond. The spread, for example, it even reached to India and China, maybe not yet at the Abbasid Caliphate yet at this time, however. As for diplomatic relations and trade, Maharaja Srivijayanasa recognized importance in maintaining diplomatic relations with neighboring kingdoms and distant empires. He cultivated alliances with rulers from China, India, and Southeast Asian states, fostering trade agreements and cultural exchange initiatives, and enriched Srivijaya's economy and cultural landscape. So not only was he strong in enforcing trade routes and enforcing his naval dominance, but he was also knew when trading was necessary and knew how to grow his own economy through trade and through having control of that and through fostering alliances, and sort of trade is based on mutual trust as well. So knew when to use the sword, or the stick and the carrot. As for his legacy and enduring influence, for his military for his Maharaja Srivijayanasa's reign marked a golden age in Srivijaya's history. Maybe not its zenith, but sort of at least started it formally as an empire, characterized by territorial expansion and cultural flourishing. So at least a period of quick and certainly fast growth and economic prosperity. His leadership and vision solidified Srivijaya's position as a dominant maritime power in Southeast Asia and left an indelible mark on the region's history and culture. So we can still see some of these great remnants today, which I hope to someday visit, perhaps with some of you, perhaps. While the exact details of his later years and death are not extensively documented, Maharaja Srivijayanasa's legacy endures in the annals of Southeastern Asian history, as perhaps maybe it's at least the first empire we've even covered in this region. Furthermore, his contribution to the promotion of Buddhism, expansion of Srivijaya's territorial control, and fostering diplomatic relations laid the foundation for centuries of prosperity and cultural exchange within the region, and even, I would say, certainly an impact still today. I always do this sort of the test, for example, if it were not for Maharaja Srivijayanasa or the Srivijaya Empire, to what extent would Buddhism exist in the region would be maybe a test in one way of its influence. But maybe the Srivijaya Empire adopted Buddhism because the people wanted it, so maybe it was a bottom-up. So there's sort of, in the Oxford Handbook of Legal History, which we've covered, there's the top-down approach, which is sort of political science, and then the bottom-up approach, which is social sciences, or sociology, pardon me. So we could consider it both ways. But we digress. We will now discuss the content of the slide. So the title is Maharaja Srivijayanasa and the Srivijaya Empire. So the fascinating and inspiring leader who founded this maritime and Thessalonocratic empire. So therefore, yes, it was a Buddhist Thalassocratic empire. It was based on the island of Sumatra, influencing much of Southeast Asia. And I might even note the first empire in the region that we covered. So there were other kingdoms during this time, but to reach the level of empire, it needed to be a certain size of the list of empires we're covering. So significant leader was Maharaja Srivijayanasa. Empire was Srivijaya. Period was circa 671 to 1025 CE, which is the medieval period. But medieval periods different in different regions of the globe, so it must be noted medieval, perhaps Southeast Asian medieval. Modern locations would be Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. I have been to Thailand. I'm fortunate to have been there. Thank you. As for million square kilometers, it's 1.2. That is quite large, a little bit larger than our average empire, which is about 1.14, so larger than our average empire. But it must be noted some of these regions were a little less developed than maybe in the Middle East or some parts of Europe, or in China, for example, so maybe relatively easy to conquer, but at the same time conquering through naval enterprise maybe is more difficult, so maybe it was even harder to hold this area of land. So it could go either way. As for million square, and is it harder to conquer through naval enterprise, or is it harder to conquer through, for example, through cavalry, through a nomadic empire, or is it through a stationary empire? They're all different, so it just has to be caveated that the size is not necessarily the one most important metric. The equivalent square miles is 0.46, and percent of the world is 0.89%. That's excluding Antarctica. Capital city was Palembang. Government was monarchy, and it was a mandala state. So a mandala is a Sanskrit word meaning circle. So the mandala is a model for describing the patterns of diffuse political power distributed among Meiyuan or Kedatuan principalities in medieval Southeast Asian history, when local power was more important than central leadership. So that's sort of how it worked, but they did have this monarchical government and centralized leader as well. So I think it still is a hereditary monarchy. Blackstone says there's hereditary monarchy and an elective monarchy. This is a hereditary one. Furthermore, common languages were Old Malay and, as we saw, Sanskrit. Religion was Buddhism. It should be not Hinduism, but it should be Buddhism. I don't know that if that was my error or an error of the source that I'm relying on, but it should be Buddhism as the religion. Hinduism is different, of course. Population, several hundred thousands to over 1 million. But it is possible there was Hinduism as well. Maybe that was from my source, and maybe that is true, but it is definitely Buddhist. Pardon me for that. Population, several hundred thousands to over 1 million. So not that large of a population. Some of our empires with even smaller regions have had larger populations, but some with larger regions have had smaller populations. And it's very hard to estimate this, how much fish, for example, were they eating. Maybe there was a greater abundance of fish at that time than there is fish today. It's very hard to tell. So that's a very broad guess. But to get a picture, maybe over 1 million, like one very large city sort of scattered. As for the images, so we have in the top left a depiction of Dapunta Hyang Sri Jayanasa, the leader we have covered, the founder of the Srivijaya Empire, the first emperor of Srivijaya, displayed in the Kedatuan Srivijaya exposition in November 2017 in the National Museum of Indonesia in Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm grateful to visit someday. To the right of that, we have the floating houses in Musi River bank near Palembang This is a photo in 1917, so this is as far back as we can go with a photo, but it's likely that this is a huge speculation, but some scholars have advocated that some of the technology is somewhat similar to what it might have been back then. So just to get a picture of what it might have looked like, but nonetheless, it's likely that they still had houses back in those times on the water, so it was thought important to include here. To the right of that, we have the Candi Gompang, a Buddhist temple in the Maro Jambi temple compounds found in the Malayu Kingdom, which later integrated as Srivijaya's important urban center. So this is an empire that we will cover. The Malayu Kingdom sort of adopts the Srivijaya Empire. And some of these sites, for example, to the right, this one here we are discussing. So beautiful, beautiful and unique temples, at least I find. And it was suggested that the Maro Jambi temple compound might be the initial location of the Srivijaya kingdom. And this is mainly because the Maro Jambi has far richer temple concentration in contrast to the scarcity of archaeological sites in South Sumatra. So also this theme, Graham Hancock, that technology or architectural technology decreased because there might have been some descendant who knew more, might be possible. At least there seems to be some truth that the Srivijaya Empire, that they believe some of the Malay kingdom ruins come from the Srivijaya Empire because they are more complex, which would lead into Graham Hancock's argument. Below that, we have another temple as well from Maro Jambi Buddhist temple complex, also in the central religious center, so also similar regions. This one happens to, however, be in the capital. But just very unique architectural style, that we have not seen in any of the other ones any other empire we've discussed so far. As for additional information, so some key events: Dapunta Hyang's expedition and expansion. Kudarkart Bukit inscription was the source, circa 671. So that's when our Maharaja Sri Jayanasa founded the empire. And then at the end, we had the Chola invasions of Srivijaya in 1025, marking the end of the empire. And sorry for there was debates. Some said up to the 13th century. Pardon me for the the dates don't necessarily line up, but I hope we cover the picture, and maybe hopefully the ones on the slides are the ones most reliable. The currency with the early Nusantara coins empire preceded by was the Kantoli, was a kingdom before, unfortunately not large enough to make our list of greatest empires, and it was succeeded by the Malayu kingdom, which we will discuss. And on the top right, we have a map of the the Srivijaya Empire, pardon me. And as we can see, sort of here are their capitals, the Srivijayan centers of power. Here's their capital, Palembang here, and see how they they exert power. And then we have other capitals here, kingdoms as well, and this is sort of the picture of Indonesia. So very fascinating empire, and as we can see, Chinese empires would be up here, dynasties up here, and our Indian dynasties would be up here as well. So very unique. Naval empire, or thalassocratic empire, if I could ever memorize that word properly. And we will discuss later more in the comparison after discussing the very important Almohad Caliphate. So the Almohad Caliphate was a significant Islamic empire that emerged in the 12th century in North Africa and eventually extended its influence over parts of the Iberian Peninsula. Its rise and fall represent a critical period in the history of Islamic Spain and North Africa. So the Almohad Caliphate, which necessarily means those who profess the unity of God. So all caliphates are necessarily very, very religiously tied states. Not all of our states have been tied to religions, but this is certainly true for our caliphates, and certainly true for our caliphates. So it's also known as the Almohad Empire, and it was a North African Berber Muslim empire founded in the 12th century. At its height, it controlled much of the Iberian Peninsula, which is known as the Al-Andalus, and North Africa, the Maghreb. So very familiar regions. We often discuss these regions interchangeably. So when we're discussing in North Africa, we may refer to it as the Maghreb. Very common term referred to in these medieval times and these empires, for example. And also the Iberian Peninsula, the Al-Andalus, and these terms are still referred to today. Al-Andalus is Spain, and for example, all the way up to Portugal even, and maybe even to France if we really want to extend it, but mostly Spain and Portugal. And further, and those are the regions that this empire ruled over, so it makes it sort of unique to some of our earlier caliphates, such as the Umayyad and Abbasid, which were based out of Iran. As for the rise of the Almohad Caliphate, so the founder, Ibn Tumart. So the Almohad movement was founded by Ibn Tumart, a Berber religious leader who preached a puritanical form of Islam known as the Almohad doctrine, which means those who profess the unity of God. He gained a following of Berber tribes of the Atlas Mountains in present-day Morocco, advocating for return for the principles of early Islam and the rejection of perceived deviations. As for a rebellion against the Almoravid rules, we have covered the Almoravid Caliphate. So the Almoravid Caliphate had been ruling in this region, sort of connected to the Abbasid Caliphate. We covered it in our Iranian intermezzo period, but they were, as we can see, succeeded by the Almohad Caliphate. And they were quite autonomous, but sort of on paper they were still in some ways controlled by the Abbasid Caliphate, but they were far away, so they were autonomous enough to be considered their own empire. So they rebelled against the ruling Almoravid, not a rebellion, more as a reaction against the ruling Almoravid dynasty, which was perceived as a decadent and corrupt. Ibn Tumart's teaching sparked a rebellion later here against the Almoravid dynasty authority, leading to an armed conflict and eventual overthrow of the Almoravid rulers in North Africa. So I thought of linking them, having continuity between the Almoravid dynasty and the Almohad Caliphate, but they're different because it wasn't that one naturally became the other. It was actually a rebellion, so it was two separate empires, or at least in beliefs, different spirit. Furthermore, so the military campaign, so following Ibn Tumart's death, his successor, Abd al-Mumin, who is the leader we'll highlight, continued the expansion of the Almohad movement, perhaps even considered the first official leader, whereas Ibn Tumart might be the sort of philosophical leader. Under Abd al-Mumin's leadership, the Almohads launched military campaigns to consolidate their control of North Africa, defeating rival Berber tribes and establishing a centralized caliphal administration. That's caliphal, like caliphate administration, which is necessarily religious and necessarily centralized. As for the conquest of the Al-Andalus, so by the mid-12th century, the Almohad Caliphate had expanded its influence into the Iberian Peninsula, so moved north into Spain and Portugal, where it challenged against the ruling Almoravid Emirate, so the dynasty or emirate. Emirates are somewhat subordinate to caliphates, nominally. The Almohads decisively defeated the Almoravids at the Battle of Alarcos in 1195 CE, allowing them to assert control over the Muslim-controlled territories of Spain, known as the Al-Andalus. So not quite Portugal, but here, in this case, just Spain. So as for the zenith, so the peak of the Almohad Caliphate, so with its centralized rule, which necessarily has been a common theme amongst our most powerful empires, so the Almohad Caliphate reaches zenith under the rule of Caliph Abu Yaqub Yusuf. He established a centralized administration, reformed legal and fiscal institutions, and promoted the Almohad doctrine of official state ideology. So also promoting this connection to religion, or necessarily being a religious or a caliphate. So as for architectural and cultural achievements, the Almohad period witnessed significant architectural and cultural achievements. The previous Almoravid dynasty was also known for its architecture. Particularly in the field of architecture, the Almohad Caliphate was known. The Great Mosque of Tlemcen and the Kutubia Mosque in Marrakesh are notable examples of the Almohad architecture. Despite my poor pronunciation, I've actually been fortunate to visit these places, and they're absolutely beautiful in Marrakesh in Morocco, characterized by their distinctive horseshoe arches and geometric decorations. So they're absolutely beautiful architecture. I always say architecture, there's a great book called The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, is sort of architecture, in my mind, grew because sort of the protagonist, he's able to do all the foundations, and once he's able to master the basics, then he can be creative. And that sort of opened my mind to how great architecture is, because it's one thing to have a beautiful building, but also it has to stand the test of time as well. As for military successes, the Almohad Caliphate enjoyed military successes against both Christian and Muslim opponents, so even against Muslim opponents as well, despite being Muslim themselves. So Caliph Abu Yaqub Yusuf launched campaigns against the Christian kingdoms in Spain, so to further expand north, temporarily expanding the Almohad territory into the northern regions of the Iberian Peninsula. But as for the decline and fall of the Almohad Caliphate, so starting with internal stripes in this case, so maybe the internal stripes were the leading cause perhaps, although there are external causes of course too. Despite its military successes, the Almohad Caliphate faced internal challenges, including succession disputes, very common, and factionalism within the ruling elite. Furthermore, these internal divisions weakened the Caliphate's ability to govern effectively and respond to external threats. So then these internal succession disputes and factionalism, the external factors become more pertinent. So with the Reconquista and loss of territory, so the Christian Reconquista, it's called, gained momentum in the late 12th and 13th centuries. The Reconquista is an important period of Christian history, leading to the gradual erosion of the Almohad control in Spain, so recapturing of the Christianity in region. The decisive Christian victory at the Battle of Las Navas in Toloso in 1212 dealt a severe blow to the Almohad forces, resulting in the loss of significant territory in Spain, regions I've been fortunate to visit as well, in a trip that actually was both to Morocco and Spain simultaneously, or concurrently, or consecutively, pardon me. As for fragmentation and collapse, however, following the defeat at Las Navas de Toloso, the Almohad Caliphate entered a period of decline marked by internal strife and external pressures. By the mid-13th century, the Caliphate had fragmented into smaller successor states known as the Taifa kingdoms, which were eventually absorbed into the emerging Marinid dynasty in North Africa. So a very important dynasty which we'll cover as well. So eventually it almost collapsed on its own accord, despite these decisive defeats by the Christians, such as Las Navas de Toloso. There was probably the leading cause, other than that and the defeats and maybe overextension, were these sort of fragmentation into the Taifa kingdoms. So following the death of moving to the specific leader, perhaps, the legacy before the specific leader, however, despite its eventual collapse, the Almohad Caliphate left a lasting legacy of history of North Africa and Spain still exists today. There's still, even in Spain, there's constant Islamic influences that's still there, of course, but even before that, the Almoravid dynasty, before the Almohad Caliphate. But these things have been here for almost 1,000 years now, or over 1,000 years for the Almoravid dynasty, so lasting impact on the regions of both the Al-Andalus and the Maghreb. Furthermore, its architectural and cultural achievements continue to influence the region, and its religious and political ideologies have left a lasting imprint on the subsequent Islamic movements in the region. So to highlight a specific leader, Abd al-Mumin. So Abd al-Mumin, also known as Abd al-Mumin ibn Ali, was a pivotal figure in the history of the Almohad Caliphate. Ibn Ali means he's descendant of Ali, a very important Islamic figure, playing a crucial role in its rise in power and subsequent expansion. Born at the end of the 11th century and ruling in the 12th century, Abd al-Mumin emerged as a military leader and statesman, leading to the Almohad movement to victory and establishing the foundations for a caliphate. So Abd al-Mumin, full name Abd al-Mumin ibn Ali ibn Alwi ibn Yala al-Kumi Abu Muhammad, was a prominent member of the Almohad movement. Although the Almohad movement itself was founded by Ibn Tumart as sort of a philosophic leader, Abd al-Mumin was the founder of the ruling dynasty, so it would be his dynasty that would rule. He would essentially be the king, essentially, and the first caliph as well of the Almohad Empire. So that would be important to cover him rather than Ibn Tumart, who is also debatably equally, if not more important, maybe less important, but I decided to cover the first caliph instead. After the death in 1130 of the movement's founder Ibn Tumart, and al-Mumin ruled until his death in 1163. So also ruling for 33 years is a very long period for a human's life. Abd al-Mumin put his predecessor's doctrine of Almohadism into practice, and he also defeated the Almoravids and extended his rule across the Al-Andalus on the Iberian Peninsula and as far as Tunis in Ifriqiya in present-day Tunisia, thus bringing the Maghreb in North Africa and the Andalus in Europe under one creed and one government. So he was the first caliph and also the one to expand both into the Al-Andalus and the Maghreb, so making him likely the most important leader of the Almohad Caliphate. So as for his early life and education, Abd al-Mumin was born in the early 12th century in present-day Algeria, or at the end of the 11th century and ruling in the 12th century. Little is known, however, about his early life and education, but he has likely received military training in Islamic disciplines, including theology, jurisprudence, and military strategy, so both religion and military. If you were of the upper echelon, you would receive certainly military training as well as religious training. As for his conversion to the Almohad movement, al-Mumin's life changed dramatically when he encountered the teachings of Ibn Tumart, so he sort of finds this philosophic leader in his life, the founder of the Almohad movement. Inspired by Ibn Tumart's message of religious reform and resistance against the ruling Almoravid dynasty, Abd al-Mumin became a devoted follower and eventually rose to prominence within the movements, sort of like a renegade or some sort of supporter of this sort of philosophic leader who wants to start an uprising against the Almoravid dynasty. As for military leadership, Abd al-Mumin distinguished himself as a skilled military commander, leading out the Almohad forces in numerous battles against the Almoravids, so proving himself worthy of his master by winning battles against these Almoravids that they did not approve of and other rival factions. He demonstrated strategic acumen and tactical prowess and on the battlefield, and earning respect and loyalty from his fellow warriors, and most likely and most certainly Ibn Tumart himself. So as for his rise to power, so with his military campaign, so following Ibn Tumart's death, his successor Abd al-Mumin, so perhaps by de facto or perhaps because he achieved the appreciation of Ibn Tumart for various reasons, he became the successor, and he continued the expansion of the Almohad movement. So maybe he was the best military leader, so maybe it was merit or maybe it was some other reason, but we're speculating. But nonetheless, what he did with the power seemed to be deserving of merit. Under his leadership, the Almohads launched military campaigns to consolidate their control over North Africa, defeating rival Berber tribes and establishing a centralized caliphal administration. As for his conquests in the Al-Andalus, by the mid-12th century, the Almohad Caliphate had expanded its influence in the Iberian Peninsula, where it challenged the ruling Almoravid Emirate. The Almohads decisively defeated the Almoravids at the Battle of Alarcos in 1195, allowing them to assert control over the Muslim-controlled territories in Spain known as the Al-Andalus, so slightly after the reign of Al-Mumin. So, as for the content of the slide, we have, furthermore, following his death, still a few more things to go. As for his expansion to Spain, Al-Mumin, ambitious expansions into North Africa, and he sought to expand the Almohads' influence in the Iberian Peninsula, as mentioned, and he launched successful military campaigns in both against the ruling Almoravid Emirate in Spain, leading to its ultimate decline in 1195, eventually conquering key territories and establishing Almohad control over much of the Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain. So, setting the groundwork for what would ultimately become the powerful Almohad Caliphate, as we shall see, quite large in size as well. So, as for his legacy, Abd al-Mumin's reign as the first caliph of the Almohad Caliphate marked a significant chapter in the history of North Africa and Spain, and the empire itself. His military conquests, administrative reforms, and promotion of Almohad ideology as ideologized by his tutor and teacher Ibn Tumart, laid the foundations for centuries of Almohad rule and left a lasting imprint on the region's political and cultural landscape. Abd al-Mumin is remembered as a visionary leader and a key architect in the Almohad Caliphate's rise to power. So, as for a very fascinating leader, an important leader, I think Ibn Tumart was perhaps correct in choosing him because he allowed it to become powerful and last for a long period as well. So, as for the content of the slide, title we have Abd al-Mumin and the Almohad Caliphate, which means those who profess the unity of God, through Ibn Tumart's preachings or teachings. It's a North African Berber Muslim empire controlling much of the Iberian Peninsula, also known as the Al-Andalus, and North Africa, known as the Maghreb. Significant leader that we highlighted was Abd al-Mumin. Empire was the Almohad Caliphate. Period was 1121 to 1269 CE, which is considered the medieval period. Modern locations include Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Spain. Million square kilometers was 2.3. Million square miles was 0.89. That's quite large. Our average is 1.14, so almost double. Well, not quite double, but significantly larger than our average empire. Percent of the world, 1.71%, and it must be noted that there were existing dynasties, such as the Almoravid, that they had to take this land from, so it wasn't easily claimed territory. But maybe it was maybe more difficult than some other regions. So that's percent of the world, 1.71%, excluding Antarctica. The capitals were Tinmel from 1121 to 1147, Marrakesh, that's a beautiful city I'm fortunate to visit, 1147 to 1269, and in the Al-Andalus, the capital was Cordoba from 1162 to 1163, and Seville from the periods of 1147 to 1162 and 1163 to 1248 CE. So Seville, for the predominantly period of the Al-Andalus, was the primary capital of the Al-Andalus. The government was a caliphate from 1147. The common languages were Berber languages, Arabic, and Mozarabic. So there were predominantly Berber tribes, but there's also the Arabic influence through Islam, for example, and Mozarabic, which is also tangential as well. Islam was Islam, of course, and its population was several millions. The images in the top left, we have a statue of Abd al-Mumin in Nadroma in Algeria. Very courageous and heroic-looking statue. On a horse, of course. To the right of that, we have the Almohad transferred the capital to the Al-Andalus in Seville. So we have some beautiful sites of Seville. So they made the capital of the Al-Andalus Seville, which is still a very major city, perhaps through the endeavors of the Almohad Caliphate, or maybe through its own merit, or through location, etc., or people. To the right of that, we have Almohad soldiers in the Cantigas de Santa Maria painting, or depiction, pardon me, on the right under white banners. So they're famous for their white banners, and we can see them on the right. here, what they might have looked like in military, and of course on horses, their shields, you can see their spears, etc. To the right and below that, we have the Calhorra Tower in Cordoba, powerful looking fortress in Cordoba. Below that, we have the Kutubiyya Mosque in Marrakesh, founded by Abd al-Mumin in 1147. So full circle for me. This is a place I've been fortunate to visit when I was younger, and al-Mumin is the leader we highlighted. So many years later, I think it was maybe, I don't recall exactly the year I was there, but many hundreds of years after al-Mumin himself. To the right of that, it was preceded by the Almoravid dynasty, which we've highlighted, the Hammadid kingdom, the second Taifas period, the kingdom of Africa, the Quranisid dynasty, and the Banu Ghaniya. It was succeeded by the Marinid Sultanate, the Hafsid Sultanate, the kingdom of Tiamken, the third Taifas period, the kingdom of Castile, the kingdom of Aragon, the kingdom of Majorca, the kingdom of Portugal, the kingdom of Leon, and the kingdom of Granada. So a large region that they encompassed. And in the top right, we have the map here. So we can see Valencia here, for example, Cordoba here, Seville is here. We have, let's see, we have Alger here. We have Marrakesh here as their capital in Morocco, and all the way over to Tripoli. So a large area of land that used to be part of former Abbasid or Umayyad Caliphate territory as well, but now completely a separate caliphate, unlike the Almoravid dynasty, which had connections still to the Abbasid Caliphate. So as for the comparison between Maharaja Sri Jayanasa and Abd al-Mumin, so to compare and contrast them. So while Maharaja Sri Jayanasa and the Srivijaya Empire and Abd al-Mumin of the Almohad Caliphate lived in different regions under different political and cultural contexts, there are several similarities and differences between these two fascinating rulers and fascinating, unique empires. So as for their similarities, they are both founders of empires. So both Maharaja Sri Jayanasa and Abd al-Mumin played pivotal figures in the establishment of expansion of their respective empires. Sri Jayanasa's leadership contributed to the growth and dominance of the Srivijaya's empire in Southeast Asia, while Abd al-Mumin's military prowess led to the rise of the Almohad Caliphate in North Africa and Spain. Maybe one small difference is some of al-Mumin's maybe prestige is attributed to Ibn Tumart, whereas Maharaja Sri Jayanasa is sort of considered the sole first leader of his empire. But Abd al-Mumin was the first caliph, and he was the first to create the dynasty as well. So as for their military leadership, another similarity, both rulers were skilled military commanders who led successful military campaigns to expand their empire's territories and influence. Sri Jayanasa conducted military expeditions to conquer new territories and protect Srivijaya's trade routes, while Abd al-Mumin led Almohad forces in battle against rival factions and established the caliphate's dominance. So maybe objective observer Maharaja Sri Jayanasa, maybe just by virtue of his empire, was more focused on war to facilitate trade or to have power over trade, whereas Abd al-Mumin was maybe focused more on military to gain land, or at least defeat an enemy. As for their cultural patronage, both rulers were patrons of the arts and architecture, as we saw both beautiful art. As we just go back, the beautiful site on Marrakesh, and we have beautiful Buddhist temples here as well. So beautiful architectural contributions, something I very much appreciate and value as contributing to the cultural flourishing of the empires. Sri Jayanasa supported the construction of the Buddhist temples and promoted cultural exchange within the Srivijaya Empire, while Abd al-Mumin commissioned architectural projects and promoted Almohad ideology in North Africa and Spain. So both patrons of the arts, both necessarily religious empires, both necessarily religious leaders, which isn't necessarily true for all of our empires and all of our leaders, and also focus on architecture, which makes them unique, particularly unique for, one might not expect a naval power to be focused on architecture, for example. As for differences, religious background, Sri Jayanasa was a ruler of the Srivijaya Empire, which was predominantly Buddhist and had strong ties to Indian culture and religion. In contrast, Abd al-Mumin was the leader of the Almohad Caliphate, a Sunni Muslim empire that sought to reform Islam and establish a puritanical state on Almohad doctrine. So maybe one difference is, firstly, their religions are clearly different, but the Almohad Caliphate, while Sunni Muslim, we have covered previous Sunni Muslim empires, the Almohad doctrine was sort of its own unique doctrine within Sunni Islam. So they were sort of professing their unique religion, whereas Sri Jayanasa was maybe continuing Buddhism as it existed from India previously. So, but otherwise, they're both certainly expanding religion simultaneously through expanding their empire. As for geographical context, Sri Jayanasa ruled over the Srivijaya Empire, which was located in the maritime Southeast Asia, with its capital at Palembang on the island of Sumatra. Abd al-Mumin, on the other hand, established the Almohad Caliphate in North Africa, with its center of power in present-day Morocco, and expanded its influence into the Iberian Peninsula. I guess one thing that maybe can be said is they definitely did not take artificial boundary or geographical boundaries as to be definitive, because they both, for example, crossing from North Africa to the Al-Andalus is sort of, but the Almoravids had already controlled both regions, so maybe they thought it was already possible. But for the Srivijayas, for example, crossing to different islands to conquer isn't necessarily intuitive, but maybe the trade routes already existed, and maybe the kingdoms had already previously done so. But nonetheless, at least it wasn't like they were going just walking on foot necessarily to all the places they were conquering. Often they had to go through quite significant obstacles. As for their political structure, the Srivijaya Empire was a maritime trading empire with a decentralized political structure consisting of various city-states and vassal kingdoms, perhaps to its detriment. In contrast, the Almohad Caliphate was a centralized Islamic state led by a caliph with strong bureaucratic institutions and hierarchical system of governance, but maybe it was ultimately declined by not being centralized enough as well. As for their legacies, while both rulers left lasting legacies on the history of their respective regions, their impacts differed in the scope and longevity. The Srivijaya Empire declined after Srivijaya's reign, eventually succumbing to external pressures and internal strife. Well, it declined after both of their reigns. The Almohad continued to exert influence on North Africa for several centuries after Abd al-Mumin's reign, but both of their empires existed for many centuries after both of their reigns. Maybe Maharaja Sri Jayanasa's empire lasted for longer after his reign, but whom shined brighter, whom shined longer, it's impossible to measure from an objective observer. Well, it's impossible for me to say on this specific issue. I think they're both great empires and great leaders. At least there's no one definitive point that I can put in either one's favor. So thus, while Maharaja Sri Jayanasa of the Srivijaya Empire and Abd al-Mumin of the Almohad Caliphate shared some similarities as founders of empires and military leaders and promoters of religions, they also differed in terms of their religious backgrounds and sort of their approach to religion, expanding it, geographical context, political structures, legacies, and the structures of their empires. So, thank you very much for watching this episode on the Srivijaya Empire and the Almohad Caliphate and Maharaja Sri Jayanasa and the Abd al-Mumin. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. This is Cashcroft TV. We're covering all the greatest empires all throughout history. Thank you very much for your support, and I'd be very grateful if you continue to provide it. Thank you so much.